Okay, so in our exploration of the War of 1812, we've seen some serious low points for the Americans. We've seen the sacking of Washington. We've seen the failure to go through and actually capture Canada like so many thought would be easy to do. But on the other hand, we've also seen some very positive moments. We've seen the fact that Fort McHenry did not fall. We've seen the victory at the Battle of New Orleans. Now, it seems more along the lines that the United States is having some successes and some setbacks. And so eventually we're going to have to come to the table with Britain, sit down, try and work out our differences, and figure out a way to come to a peace treaty. Now, we've already had a couple of treaties we've had that the U.S. has been involved with. You can think of both treaties of Paris, both for the ending of the French and Indian War, and then, of course, for the end of the Revolution. Well, now we're going to talk about the city of Ghent in Belgium and the Treaty of Ghent between the United States and Britain, which brought the War of 1812 to a conclusion. Now, you got to keep in mind, Britain had been fighting Napoleon for quite a while, as had other nations in Europe. Russia, the Tsar, was concerned that Britain's attention needed to be a little more focused on European affairs, and so he was the one that really kind of helped, helped push Britain and America to the negotiating table. But once we got there, the demands Britain was placing on the U.S. were, the word would be grandiose. Okay, they're going through and they are demanding a ton of stuff. I mean, for example, they want an Indian buffer state in the Great Lakes region. They want to create essentially a country in between the United States and Canada that would act as a buffer zone, that would prevent the Americans from being able to ever attack Canada directly again. So they want that in the Great Lakes region. They also want control of the Great Lakes themselves. Now, we mentioned before, Great Lakes are essentially an inland sea, and Britain wanted 100% control to go exclusively to Britain. In addition to that, they wanted to keep the vast majority of the land they had captured in what is present-day Maine. So they were going through and they were demanding all this because they had been winning more than they had been losing. Remember, the Battle of New Orleans has not happened yet, and so that really did not figure into anything. But the British had been doing quite well in regards to the war, and as such, they saw that they were in the driver's seat, that they were the ones that could make the demands of the United States, and essentially the United States would not have, a lot they could say about it. But the good news was that the American team was led by Mr. John Quincy Adams here. John Quincy Adams, he's the son of former President John Adams. He will end up being president in his own right. But he is the one who's looking at all these demands of the British, and he refuses. He refuses to go through and just allow Britain to demand absolutely everything with the expectation that the United States will just have to, agree to it. And as I've said several times, since we have the benefit of 2020 hindsight, we can know that holding out was the best idea, that there would be some British reverses. For example, Admiral Perry's victory, that would be beneficial. These would go through and they would make the British have to rethink things. Plus, two, there was becoming a war weariness among the British. And so we are going to go through and we are going to end up with a treaty that is not exactly what Britain wanted, but still not what the U.S. wanted either. Treaty of Ghent was signed on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, in 1814. And what it was an armistice. Okay, it was not a surrender or anything along those lines. It was essentially an acknowledgement that the war had been a draw. Okay, neither side had won. Both sides could keep fighting, but it was questionable as to who would eventually win if either side. So they acknowledge that it's a draw, and they pretty much start to ignore the demands of either side. We simply stopped fighting. Both the British and the Americans just sort of stopped. Okay, we just, moved on from there. The main issue of the war, if you remember, that all went back to the question of impressment of American sailors. That was never resolved. They never talked about it here. But the good news was we had at least brought the war to a conclusion. Now, while it wasn't an American victory, neither was it a British victory. It was essentially a draw. Both sides had fought to a standstill, and then both decided, all right, enough of this, we're going to go home. It would have been nice if there had been, a little more on the issue of impressment to get everybody, a little happier. But sometimes you have to just accept what you get. And in this case, the Treaty of Ghent, finalized just before Christmas. Message was sent to the United States and to the British commanders in North America, and we didn't receive that till after the Battle of New Orleans. So sometimes communications is not all that it's cracked up to be. But as I said, at least now we had peace.